Hello, everyone. I'm here with Mr. Tom Zabriskie, one of the leading documentary filmmakers in Australia. Hello, Tom. So to start with the questions, we're wondering, as a pioneer in Australian documentary filmmaking, what inspired you to pursue this path and what has kept you motivated throughout the years?
Well, I guess there's a couple of answers to that question um, that I guess overlap. I mean, one thing that's always motivated me was that the thought that documentaries could make a difference, that they could highlight aspects of our society and maybe give the people viewing sort of capacity to understand issues that they might otherwise not have faced before or understood before, and maybe even motivate them to take some action based on their understanding. So I guess documentaries linked to the sort of the idea of making a difference of social change. Now, that doesn't necessarily have to motivate everybody to make a documentary in this way, just to change people's ideas and galvanize them to action. It is also a career. I mean, for me, it's a career. For other people, it's something that they might just want to do once or twice, and that's it, and which could lead them into um, other directions, possibly pursuing careers in the more mainstream media. Um, well, these days, the mainstream media could be anything, really. I guess from Netflix to the ABC. But for me, documentaries have always been independent of the mainstream media. Yes, there is a relationship with the mainstream media, obviously, if you get commissioned. So when I first started off, I really just wanted to make films to make a difference. I did them cheaply on video, and then from video, I actually went. Feel like I graduated to film, because back in those days when I started in the 1970s, video was pretty primitive, pretty basic. So I joined my colleagues and we made film documentaries on 16 millimeter. But in the mid 90s, I kind of went back to making videos again. And since then, I've just been basically making and completing and delivering my documentaries, in a sort of digital form. So I guess I've answered a few other questions at the same time as answering that one. Yeah, where do we take it from there? Do we? If you had another question for me, yeah.
Yes. Well, you spoke wonderfully of the power of documentary filmmaking just then to enact social change. And you've had over 50 years working since your youth, as you said. And we were wondering if you could share a pivotal moment in your filmmaking journey that has significantly impacted your approach to filmmaking or in other ways.
Look, I've been exposed to a lot of really good documentaries, particularly at film festivals, and I certainly would encourage people who are interested in pursuing this career to do that. In fact, in Sydney, there's a very good film festival just specialising just in documentary called Antenna, and it's going to be on next year in February. But that just as an aside. In terms of pivotal moments, well, I guess my pivotal moment in documentary was when I had a full-time job, and I decided to leave that job and just pursue a documentary which I was really really passionate about. So I mean, just to kind of summarize what the documentary was, it was actually a documentary about a group of coal miners in a mine in Wollongong, near Wollongong, who decided to do a sit-in strike. They locked themselves up in the mine underground to protest their jobs. The context was Australia was going through a bit of an economic recession. A lot of people were put out of work, particularly people in the mining and manufacturing sector. We're talking now about the 1980s. So I took off with a camera crew, friends of mine who were prepared to work unpaid on deferred wages, and we made the film. The coverage I got was really quite something quite exceptional, and the whole story made headlines, and I was just lucky that I was there on the inside of the story. For like, I had a personal relationship with everybody involved, and the film I made was quite different to what was shown on television. Anyway, the film went on to be very successful. We managed to get some funding and sold it to the ABC. So that really started me off on my career properly. I'd made a film before that called Waterloo, but Chimera Diary of a Strike that's the title of the film. Really made things a lot easier to raise money for future films. Given that this one was successful, it went to film festivals, it sold to broadcasters, it got audiences in the cinema. In fact, we screened the film at the Sydney Opera House for about a week. What would I sort of say? I'd probably basically why I'm saying this is because I think there's a fair bit of risk taking involved in making documentaries. It's not something often that you can plan either. Sometimes you just have this kind of instinct to follow an unfolding story. And when I started filming this particular underground strike, it had only just started. But I thought I could introduce myself to people who were involved in the strike, and then I could ask them whether I could just remain on the inside. I wasn't actually going underground, but we did smuggle a camera underground. But I was I was working actually with some of the support groups, the families. I was focusing on one particular family, and following them right through the strike, right through months later. So what I did was I really had a very personal angle on something which, as far as the media was concerned, just came and went. So really, I think maybe I'm asking a question you're going to ask me later, but documentaries can be made in all sorts of different ways. You don't necessarily have to make them following an unfolding story. You can actually script them and then start filming when they're scripted. But these days, people tend to pursue something that they're interested in with their own cameras. Something might develop out of the initial filming. And this is what I've been doing anyway in more recent films. I sort of use the camera as a research tool. I often use the cameras to build up a relationship with people, across the camera. And soon I kind of work out, well, whether they're suitable subjects for the documentary. And sometimes I decide to keep filming. Other times I decide to put the camera down and often give them what I've filmed, but decide to disengage from the story. Not every sort of filming situation necessarily gives rise to a story, to a full-blown documentary. Some documentary subjects can only really need only be short films. What I encourage people who are starting off to do is to look around them. Look around them in their own neighborhoods. Look around them with people who they're familiar with. You know, often the first films are films that are made from people you know really well. You know, there might be your siblings, your parents. There's been some excellent documentaries made about looking back at you know, families. You know, so many people have mined their family histories. It's really, really rich material for documentary. I haven't done that personally, but I know many, many people who have.
So more on, sorry, were you going to say something more? We were curious more on the power of documentary filmmaking, precisely how you saw its role and power in the modern world. For instance, one of the main reasons a group of friends at my school came together and created Docu was that we saw documentaries as this perfect intersection between creativity and the humanities, with sort of real world facts and tangible ways to enact change.
Sure. I think it's what you've hit on is a very important intersection. It's an intersection of art and technology. I think you can pursue a subject in all sorts of different ways, but some of the best documentaries I've seen have a kind of a, you know, they're poetic. You know, they're about a slice of life, but they're also art. When I said before about documentaries making a difference, I was talking, I'm not excluding making films like that in a way where I'm employing styles and techniques which are not necessarily conventional, but they can be unconventional as well. So I think it's important that people don't necessarily keep to conventional tropes like you know, interviewing, just simply interviewing. They can do all sorts of things. You know, they can you know, go into a studio and do green screen, for instance, animation. They can poetically narrate a documentary. You know, they can, you know, like I tend to do, pursue it observationally, following characters over a, you know, a period of time, and seeing what story that you can form out of being with them, over, particularly if they're doing something interesting, and achieving some sort of goal, you know, and going on a journey. You know, you can do that in a very simple way in a short film. You can do that in a long film. You can be filming observationally for months. Mm-hmm. One of the things I think is crucial, though, is that filming is one thing, but editing is also very, very important. And also working as a team. That, yeah, you can do everything yourself. These days, you can get a camera, you can do laptop editing, and so on. But it's actually really good to you know, see yourself not only as somebody who can do everything, but also specialize in something. You know, you might want to specialize in camera. You might want to specialize in editing. Some of the, if you're really a director, that's what your ambition is, then you need to form a good relationship with a very experienced editor, particularly if you're starting off. I've just recently been doing that in a documentary called The Carnival, which was screened at the Sydney Film Festival. And it's a film about people a family who runs shows and carnivals all over Australia. And the director been following this sort of journey with this particular family around the country for about 8 years. And she approached me 2 years ago, and we managed to secure some funding from philanthropy initially, and then from SBS to make the film. And it's been very successful. So, so it's documentaries are about real life, but sometimes, real life takes you in all kinds of different directions, and you just really have to build really good relationship with people, with your participants, your characters, if you want to call them, and get a good editor and just craft the film as you do more filming, and eventually come up with hopefully a fantastic film at the end. But I'm talking about really the higher end of documentary making. Probably what you're thinking about and what you're asking me is how to make shorter documentaries. But I think the same rules can apply. You can still film over several weeks with somebody who's actually going through a particularly a kind of a situation which might be a sort of change of life situation. They might be undergoing a particular transition to a new job, a new lifestyle. They might be moving house, all sorts of there could be all sorts of things that could kind of generate a story, that might result in a film, in a short film.
On the idea of documentary filmmakers, especially students who are just starting off, and I recall previously you mentioned the tip of looking around us. We're wondering if you had any other advice you would offer to students who are just beginning to explore filmmaking and documentary, who would like to harness the power of it, as we sort of just discussed?
Sure. Look, one of the things I tend to tell people is if you don't spend too much time writing a script or a treatment. Sure, I think you need to do that to get the initial idea going, to get your thoughts together and ideas together. But then you should begin to start shooting and then discover the film along the way. And also be prepared to change direction at any time. And the other thing is to look for something strange and unexpected in the ordinary. And use irony. Irony is always a strength. And another thing that I often say to people, well, if you're following a journey, you're going on a journey with somebody, you might make sure you're there at the critical times when things happen. You might need to second guess the future, but you also need to get that person to tell you what's going on. So you need also to be truthful and accurate and ethical as well. That goes without saying. But in terms of changing the world, well, I think you can't pretend that every documentary is going to change the world, but you can influence people in a particular direction if you give them something that they can relate to. They can emotionally relate to. They can relate to in terms of the issues that they themselves are going through.
Wow, I think those are some very profound tips for any viewer who may be watching this and wanting to create their first documentary. It most certainly provided me with many insights. So on the topic of choosing a topic for your documentary. Your documentaries have covered a range of social and political issues, and we're curious to know how you choose your topics, or do you simply, as you mentioned, look around the world, and if there's anything of particular interest that you would like to illuminate, you just pursue it and see where that goes?
Sure. I have been driven by my interest in particular issues that I feel have a resonance to the time we're going through and have an importance. Say climate change, for instance. About 13 years ago, I wanted to make a film that dramatized climate change, and I was drawn to the Pacific to do that, rather than making it here in Australia. The reason I was drawn to the Pacific was that I felt that people in Australia were ignorant of the encroaching, well, I won't say encroaching, but certainly the sea level rise and the how critical that was to low-lying countries, how they could impact on the future of those countries continuing to be viable nations. So I went to Kiribati, which is in the middle of the Pacific, an archipelago of islands, and the highest point on this island, as people jokingly told me, is a sort of speed hump on the road. It's you could see the effects of climate change as witnessed through the sea level rise there on one of the main islands in the archipelago. It was really quite dramatic. So I made the film by focusing on a woman who's an activist. She was a person who wanted to tell the world about what was happening to her nation. And I followed her to the climate change conference in Copenhagen. That was one of the first ones there in the year, gosh, when was it? I think it was about 2008. I followed her all the way through the conference and back to Kiribati again. And I saw her change, grow, and mature, become really. I saw her passion. I saw how people responded to her passion when she spoke to them at a conference, person to person. And anyway, it was a film that I managed to sell to SBS, and we also reached audiences through film festivals. We had other screenings in Sydney. It's a documentary which made a social impact. And these days, there are many documentaries which are made simply to create a social impact. In fact, there's an organisation based in Sydney called Documentary Australia. And I advise anybody interested in looking at documentaries that have a social impact to look at what this particular organisation has supported. They've got a range of films on their website that are looking for support, looking for money, looking for their donations, and other films that have already been finished. It's one way of actually funding documentaries these days is through philanthropy. This particular organisation is set up so that people can actually get a tax write-off, 100% tax write-off if they donate to a particular films or film. Anyway, this wasn't around when I was making my film. The name of the film was The Hungry Tide. Anybody interested in this film, they can stream the film from my website, which is just my name, www.tomzabriskie.com. also other films that I've made. Most of them are just freely available, just to stream off my site. But that's a very good example of how my passion has then led to making a documentary about something which was, you know, now especially is really, really one of the most important issues on the government agenda and around the world. So I was proud of having made that film back then. It's, yeah, passion does drive documentary filmmaking, certainly, but also you don't necessarily need passion to make issue-based films. You can make films that are more kind of individual focused, more poetic. You know, they don't necessarily have to be based just around issues of our time. You know, they can be just human dramas, essentially.
To deliver these powerful messages you would like to share, some of them being ones you're passionate about, we were curious if you had any preferred storytelling techniques that you would use to engage viewers.
Look, there are different ways of telling stories. In documentary, you know, you can simply narrate over images, or you can interview people, or you can follow people around in an observational style. I tend to do the very last of those three, but you can combine the three styles in one film. A lot of people do that, and a lot of my films combine interviews, they combine a bit of narration, they combine observation. So, you know, there's no one way. I think you should choose a way that's feels right to you, and just experiment, and just see as many films as you possibly can, just to get an idea of you know, the kind of styles that people are adopting. I mean, there's no better way to start than you know, looking at current documentaries. You find a lot of them on the DocPlay site, streaming site called DocPlay. Yeah, just go for it.
On the idea of experimenting, as a professional and even youth documentary filmmakers go through their journey, they often encounter obstacles. We're wondering if you could share perhaps some of the biggest obstacles you faced, or perhaps some of the most rewarding experiences you've had whilst pursuing this passion.
Sure. I mean, obstacles are always coming up in documentary work. You know, you can't get access to people, you know, that you might want to get access to at a particular time. You might miss something that they've just been involved in, they haven't told you. All these sorts of things come up. But probably the most exciting time was when I was with José Ramos Horta in East Timor. This is a film called The Diplomat, which I made, which follows this freedom fighter called José Ramos Horta. Follows him around the world, advocating for the freedom of his nation, his country of East Timor. And in the latter part of 1999, the Indonesians called out their forces from East Timor, and they organized a referendum. People voted for independence. So when José flew back to Timor for the first time in 24 years, we were there in the plane and with him inside the car as it drove through the streets, people shouting, waving flags. It was an extraordinary moment. I'll never forget it.
Hmm. And final question, Tom. You've undoubtedly left a great legacy in documentary filmmaking within Australia. How would you like to see that legacy continue? And what do you hope the next generation of documentary filmmakers can bring to the field?
Well, I tend to be doing a lot more producing than directing these days. So my legacy is based on the films that I help other people realize. I get on board people who are less experienced, and I facilitate their films from often early days right through to post-production, and make sure they get as much exposure as possible. What was the last question? Sorry, the final point.
Contributions do you hope to see the next generation of documentary
Okay.
filmmaking?
The next generation. Well, I think the next generation can possibly continue the work that we started when we began in the 1970s. There were no such thing as independent documentaries. Yes, there were documentaries made, but they were made in government organizations or within broadcasters, but not outside broadcasters. So just basically to continue the tradition of independent documentaries to always look behind the issues of the day. That's really what you need to do, is not to take anything for granted that you see, or hear in the media, but just to try and find something that's different, unique, that sort of takes an understanding of something much further, and maybe leads to action. So it's we're looking at documentaries that have a relationship with social impact, with social change, and I think that's something that's here to stay. And I expect the younger generation to carry on this tradition.
Awesome. I think that's something we can all take on.
Okay. If people are interested, by the way, I don't know, they might want to have a look at I've got this on my website. It's a book or monograph that I wrote about 3 years ago, which has a good history of Australian documentary in it. So that might be of interest to people. And I might actually send you a link, Stephen, that you can give to to interested students.
Great.
A link to the presentation and also to my website.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Tom. I'm sure the students viewing this will learn many things.
Okay, all right. Great stuff.